is the only shield that one has. We hope it will be over soon, but challenges remain to vaccinate majority of the people. World is as divided as ever. While to fight this pandemic, it was important for us to have a global solidarity. Indeed, there is no dearth of statements, as we have seen in different groups and meetings, whether you go into the UN, WHO, or wherever. Everywhere you find, whether they're bilateral meetings, plurilateral, multilateral, everywhere everybody talks about collaboration and cooperation to fight the virus, but that is not seen on the ground very often. And on the other hand, what we are seeing is that the protectionism is also increasing tremendously, as it used to be before, I mean more now, and which indeed has turned out to be, in my view, a direct threat to the liberal international order, whether it is related to trade or movement of persons, or for that matter, international discourse itself. So I find that that is something that is going to be a challenge. I also feel that what kind of an global order will emerge, or it will be a disorder or discorder. We don't know really how it's going to work out. But what are the signs today? That's what I would like to speak a little bit about this, that how is the dynamic between various powers and actors and multilateral organizations and their role. I mean, that's very, very important in that sense. And then how we are going to navigate, because we are representing 1/6 of the world population, and we have been impacted very badly. So what role are we going to play in the global regional dynamic is also something that is very, very difficult to appreciate at this stage. As you know, that COVID-19 actually is some kind of a thing that appears once in a century. So that means the people become complacent in order to fight or think that will not happen. That is not true. There have been studies, there have been plans, but this is all done. What we have seen over time is, surprisingly, that despite the fact that this could have happened and there have been indications before, the world was not prepared for it. The most advanced economies to the poorest countries, their crumbling health infrastructure, the policy paralysis, leadership vacuum, and often the state of denial on the part of those who are in the lead positions. And that's what has caused the major problem in this. If you remember, the masking in the US was such a big problem. So was in European countries. We all look up to these Western countries thinking that they have much more and better healthcare systems than we have. And so we have that. Second thing is that you see the second biggest power, that is China, which is emerging. I mean, the virus came from there. Everybody knows it. It has come from the lab. Whether it was engineered or whether it was a natural is still going to be investigated. But the fact that in the early months, the country like China did not rise to the occasion and inform the global community about the threats or its findings that it had, it caused this scale of problems for everyone. But today, what is happening? I mean, what has happened in 1.5 years is everybody knows it. But what is happening today is that since as you know, President Biden has asked for investigations to be done in this. So we are looking at a situation where we have to find from China. I mean, one more thing is, the more stronger you are, very difficult to tame them. So it will be some kind of a collaborative mechanism rather than cornering them. They themselves have been aggressive across the board. As you know, in China, that a country with 18 countries, boundaries with 18 countries, has disputes with 22 or 23 countries. And their diplomats have been indulging in bull warrior diplomacy and all that. So on the other hand, but during the Trump's 4 years, if you were to see, even before the vaccine, before this pandemic, you saw that there was a great disdain for the international order, for the multilateral systems. And this is America first became the main thing. So that is what was also instrumental in hurting the global and value supply chains to a great extent. Now what we are looking at is the economy of the countries obviously have been directly impacted because of lockdowns, because of lack of availability of resources, movement, logistics, and everything. And so we are seeing, but today, yesterday we saw that in 21, 22, we see the growth rate of the OECD projected is roughly going to be about 5.8%. That's likely to be much higher as compared to what was expected earlier. So if that happens, then it is really a very good thing. So, but I don't know. I mean, many countries will have the third, fourth waves, and we don't know how it is going to mutate the virus and what kind of an impact it will have overall. But at the same time, we have seen what has happened. The world has been divided into vaccine haves and the have-nots, and which is a very major problem. In fact, the South African president Ramaphosa in France last week said that they are indulging in vaccine apartheid, vaccine nationalism. Now that is causing a major problem. The 0.3% of vaccine has been given to the poorest countries, whereas it has been hoarded by the Americans, by the Europeans. You know that we are reading all the time. So this kind of a thing does not behave well for the system that we are really looking forward to. So we are looking at a real crisis in the international system, in the lack of responsibility on the part of the major powers. On the other hand, we are also witnessing some kind of a Cold War 2.0 mentality, which is continuing. And of course, it's not going to be exactly the same as used to be between US and Soviet Union. It'll be very different between US and China. And how it will be played out is more on the economic and technology domain rather than the actual fights. We have just seen that if the bioweapon theory is correct, you know that with the little, very little investment, you have really brought the world to its knees. Now, that is the kind of thing that is going to play out. In my view, I believe that there are 4 H that are going to be the real challenge now. One is hunger, another one is health, third is habitat, and fourth is high tech. These are going to be the future priorities, whatever kind of world order we are going to look at. Of course, other challenges are not only climate change, which I mentioned in the habitat aspect, but counterterrorism. It has not reduced. We have not seen that the hotspots have gone down any under. There have been still continuing problems. We just saw Israel and Gaza war just about 10 days ago. We are seeing the weaponization of this space in which there is a very major race between all the major countries. Then they will try to collaborate on certain key issues or larger issues on the similar ones, but then they will also continue to be the problems because of, as we see what is happening in the Indo-Pacific, what will happen in the Arctic as far as the freedom of navigation is concerned. Likewise, we will have a problem of technology trade. I mean, how it is going to move, how the terrorism and investment, tourism and investment is going to play up, how the mobility and movement of personnel will be seen eventually. These are some of the challenges that we have to watch for, in my view, and I think that that's where we will have to work quite closely. Secondly, now first thing, it looks like that everybody is trying to fend for himself or itself, which is why we say India first, America first, China first, Russia first, all those kind of first policies. Now, how are these first going to be integrated or find a common minimum program to coexist so that this deglobalization that seems to be happening is not allowed to derail the whole process, in my view. There will be a step-by-step approach eventually. The countries will come out of it. But I think that I'm also looking at a very difficult international scenario. I hope I'm wrong. But things are that economically there's going to be problems. Gulf countries, the rich, oil-rich countries, they are facing a major problem. There are going to be possibly unrest. There are going to be fiscal and monetary problems in the countries, despite the kind of injection of capital they are planning to do. So hopefully that the bigger countries will come out and they will not become that much protectionist. So that is what something that we are going to have a look at, and I hope that will bring about a post-pandemic environment which will be conducive to the growth, even though chances are very slim.
Absolutely, sir. You're right when you said that at this point of time that the world needs to come together and need to perform together, because no healthcare system of a particular country is suffice enough to deal with such a grave situation. And when countries are looking for their own vaccine nationalism, and following such policy, that it definitely becomes a great challenge. So, taking this further, what do you think that to what extent international organizations like United Nations, WHO, and WTO has been effective in addressing the uncertainties that has been unleashed by the pandemic, and what's your take on these institutions becoming venues for competition between major powers? And also tell us, I shall repeat my question, sir.
Yeah.
So, yes, sir. To what extent do you think that international organizations like United Nations, WHO, and WTO has been effective in addressing the uncertainties that has been unleashed by the pandemic? And what's your take on these institutions becoming venues for competition between the major powers? And also, sir, tell us about how effective can the regional cooperation can be in dealing with such crises.
Well, Garima, the thing is that we have seen that these organizations are still living in the post-Second World War mindset. There has been no reforms in any of these organizations, and therefore they are unable to cope up with the present day conflicts or the present day uncertainties. And that is the problem. And that's one of the reasons that India has been asking for reforms in the United Nations Security Council and the UN organizations, including the World Health Organization, WTO, everywhere. So reforms are needed to be commensurate with the modern day reality. And that is something which is very important. And that's precisely the reason that they have been ineffective. We have seen how they were all, I would say now you can say today, by hindsight, that they were very uncertain about themselves. The World Health Organization from the very beginning, it was being seen as being partial to China, as if it was in hand in glove. Secondly, the kind of statements that are coming from there, whether this treatment, that kind of vaccine is useful or not, we don't know. The WTO again has had a problem, but it all goes back to, at the end of the day, I tell you, these are organizations where the big countries, the powerful countries have their own voice. And as the US previous president used to say, that UN is an instrument of our foreign policy. So that answers your question, that for them, this is if they don't serve their purpose, they go the unilateral way. We have seen it that so many places these big countries have gone and either annexed them or bombed them or did anything. So that's why, and helplessly, you keep on looking at it, what is happening. So this has to change. The other countries who are bigger, powerful, like India, have to be part of the system. Fortunately, we have been very active. We've been founding members. Even before we achieved our independence, we've been part of it. So reforms of these organizations, as I said, is extremely important. WHO's weakness has been exposed during the pandemic rather badly, and something needs to be done about it. Fortunately, we are in the World Health Assembly this time, and I think you remember that Trump walked out of WHO when he called China virus and he thought it was complicit. Fortunately, because walking away from the organization, because they are the only things that are there where smaller countries, the weaker countries can go and look for some kind of a redressal. So just walking away, if the big countries walk away or do not or defy the logic of these organizations, then obviously we are in a very bad state and we can't think of any global governance. So we have to strengthen them. That's important. But where they are lacking, that needs to be addressed, and that needs to be addressed by the P5 countries, the big countries today. So it is very true that there is a competition. And that is the reason that very often the UN Security Council resolutions are not passed. Because if all the five, that is, and which is currently divided into 3 and 2, for example, US, France, and the UK on one side, Russia and China on the other, and therefore the Security Council does not seem to function. So anything that directly impacts on their national interest, the global pattern, does create an impasse, and therefore it is very difficult. So I believe that that's the reason that we are seeing the growth of more plurilateral organizations, for example, Quad, for example, BRICS, or RIC, or IPSA, or NAFTA, and the other. So there are an umpteen number of these kind of organizations which are coming up, 3-4 countries getting together, addressing their own issues. They're not necessarily bad, because even the World Trade Organization allows the trade unions like European Union and SAARC and others to be to exist and be in compliance with the requirements of the World Trade Organization. So we are. This is something that is happening, and even the banks have been open. For example, the BRICS has come up with a bank of its own to support. So because they felt that institutions like World Bank, the IMF, were actually very prescriptive. Secondly, they were also working under the thumbs of these big economies. And today, the big economies are India and China, and therefore they need to have a role. And unfortunately, China's growth is not becoming synonymous with benign growth, and that's why you have a problem. Now, I would say the BRICS, which had just had a meeting only 2 days ago, I think the foreign ministers meeting, it really focused on how to do it. Another thing I would like to tell you is about the SAARC, for example. It has been dysfunctional because of problems between India and Pakistan's adherence of terrorism as an instrument of its foreign policy. But at the same time, what we are looking at is when the pandemic occurred, then India took the lead and we created the SAARC COVID Fund and things like that, provided assistance, capacity building. And India also came out internationally through the international organizations. So that remains. And this time we are also part of the UN Security Council. And therefore, India is making initiatives, taking initiatives. But as you know, as a non-permanent member, you can go thus far and no further. So that's what I'm saying. A lot of free trade agreements are coming up, like, regional comprehensive economic partnership, which 16 countries, China-led, Japan, Australia, all the big economies are there. India is looking at the possibility of its collaboration with the European Union or with US or UK, the big FTAs. So I think that things are becoming far more dispersed in that manner. So we will see that multilateral institutions, the plurilateral institutions will all live side by side, and sometimes they will come in conflict with one another. So we don't know exactly who will succeed and who will not succeed, because the competition is going to be a part of this. In this sense, you will see the US-China rivalry, US-Russia rivalry is going to be a defining feature. What happens with there are only 4 or 5 major actors, if you can think about US, China, Russia, Europe, and if you include India. Europe means EU. So they are the 4 or 5 major actors that are going to play around the whole gamut of international dynamic, whether in the global world order, whether in the international institutions, whether in the multilateral institutions. And they have their own problem. I mean, EU and US also have a problem. US and India have many problems. So like that, but we are seeing that there are greater growth as far as wherever their issues are there. For example, in the area of vaccines, now you have seen there is a Quad initiative, which is very useful. I mean, in fact, it will be like that India will be manufacturing the J&J vaccines, about 1 billion doses, which will be funded by Japan and Australia for logistics and for support. So that's a very good thing. And those will be used for ASEAN countries as well as for other countries. So we need to work together. But this big power rivalry is what is going to give us a run, actually, for having a smoother order. Every now and then we are seeing that between China, what happens between China and US on the bilateral front will be seen to be explicitly affecting the global landscape, whether in multilateral institutions or anywhere else.
Right. When you talked about 2 superpower rivalries, you mentioned about USA and China. So, sir, I would just like to know that since the China is on the path of recovery and USA is still struggling with the COVID cases, rising number of the COVID cases, so though the situation will be handled by both the superpowers, but eventually, but do you think that the global balance of power is gradually shifting from west to east? Is the future of US and China relationship is likely to be marked by confrontation, or is there a possibility of cooperation between the world's largest economy? Yes, sir, that's the question.
You see, it is, if you were to look at it since the time of President Trump, when he found about the virus, he was also against China. He wanted to bring it back into the system. He wanted to reduce the trade deficit, and he imposed sanctions on China and Russia and all other countries, in that manner. So that is why there was an imbalance in the global system that came about. It is not that China is innocent. China is extremely manipulative as far as trade and investment and other things are concerned. But China is too big today because it controls the value and supply chains. So everything that emanates from there affects everywhere else in the world. And that has happened because of the support it has received from the Western countries over years. And so today, China is far too big to be ignored. That is very simple, number one. Number two, whether China is following any international rules or rule-based order is questionable. No, there are many ways where we can see that China has been violating. It does not respect the law of the land, the international law very often. You have seen it when it happens against Philippines. It refused to follow the International Court of Justice. So that is there. But as far as US and China are concerned, now that as we are talking, on the trade matters, there has been within a week, there have been 2 meetings between the senior officials of Chinese and the Americans on trade matters. So what I look at is while there will be a competition that will continue, and the Americans will, under Biden at least, will try to see if China can play by the rules, which is impossible. That has been their hope for a very long time because China has a model that it wishes to follow. Only thing that could have changed that was if US and Russia were able to work together. Today, what has happened because of the US's policies, Russia and China have come together. Now, that is something we are finding increasingly difficult to deal with even for the Americans, because European Union is not exclusively with the Americans. They're also looking for their interest with China. China is the biggest trading partner. Germany, for example, will not go along with the other. And that's the largest economy in the area. France, for that matter. All of them are veering towards Indo-Pacific in the hope that if there is a destabilization in the process, at least we are there to take the pie. No, so that's the reason. So I feel that hopefully, this is my hope, like we have done with China, for example, there is something called cooperation and competition. So you cooperate where it is, because see, you cannot do climate change negotiations if China is not on board, right? If the nuclear disarmament or some kind of a containment, you can't do if Russia and China are not on board. You can't control the supplies in different parts, because if the world gets divided into 2 or 3 blocks, as is likely, you will have a continuous fighting between them. And that will be, I think, a bit more problematic to handle even for Americans, because America's economy is dwindling, it's declining economy, right? Same, China is also growing at the moment. It has come out of the pandemic rather fast compared to other countries. Countries like India are still struggling to come out of the pandemic effects of the pandemic. Russia has suffered a great deal, both for sanctions and due to the low oil prices, like the Middle Eastern countries. So the overall situation, everybody seems to be suffering, right? So in this suffering, can they take a more rational viewpoint and everybody could starts collaborating? Maybe it's very idyllic and idealistic, but I think there is no other way.
Right, so it is very difficult to predict the cooperation between the major powers. Of course, there is a difference of ideology and perspective. So, sir, when we see that while dealing with the COVID-19 crisis today, USA is obviously the leading power and superpower. So it has established a world order post World War II, and that is a liberal world order based on rules. There has been a responsibility taken up by these powers across the world when certain kind of situations world has faced. So can USA and its allies reconstruct the global healthcare system to make it more resilient to the global pandemic? And can the world afford vaccine nationalism policy and hoarding and rigid patent adherence in the face of global emergency, which we can see that South Africa and India last year went to WTO and asked for temporary removal of the TRIPS agreement for vaccines and everything. So what's your take on this?
Well, there is your second question, can the world afford vaccine nationalism? Absolutely not. It is just not possible, even though the biggest powers are doing that. For example, the USA follows that policy, and it refused to give it to even Canada and Mexico. Eventually it gave. Even when India asked for supply of raw materials, they say America first. they have been hoarding vaccines, even the vaccines that they don't need. For example, 80 million AstraZeneca. They are not using AstraZeneca. They are only using Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So, but holding it, why do they hold? Simple, just to use it when it is needed in order to serve their geopolitical interests. There's nothing else. I need 2 rupees, but I am keeping 10, just thinking the rate might be used later, right? Or may not be used, right? So they booked earlier, the rich countries, they have money, they decided. In the initial time, as you know, they had not been able to handle it properly. The USA totally mishandled this pandemic. So did most of the European countries. Very few countries were able to do it in the beginning, in the first phase. India was one of them, which has tried to do it early on. But we have goofed up in the second one. The only other country which comes to my mind is New Zealand, which has done remarkably well in handling the virus across the all strains. So we are having that problem now. As you know, there's something called V5. There are only the 5 countries that are making the vaccines right now, and which is Russia, China, India, UK, and US. So it's called V5. Now, of all these V5, the only country that has been manufacturing the vaccines for the others is India. I mean, India is manufacturing AstraZeneca as well as it's manufacturing Sputnik vaccine from Russia, right? But there has been a vaccine geopolitics as well, as you know, like they tried to defeat that the Chinese or the Indian or the Russian vaccines are not good enough, whereas efficacy of the Russian vaccine is said to be very good. They have WHO has still not approved the India's Covaxin. So the supplies are becoming increasingly difficult if you don't approve the vaccine internationally. So we have to see this. It's a very myopic kind of approach that some of these countries have taken. We also know that India followed a policy. For example, in the early days, as you know, we supplied several medicines which were required by various countries in the world, and 150 odd countries we sent the hydroxychloroquine, paracetamol, PP kits, and healthcare professionals and whatnot. And in fact, if you remember a very interesting this thing from the Brazilian president, who called this a Sanjeevani. On the other hand, we said, okay, we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So when the vaccine situation came in India, there was tremendous hesitancy. We have a lot of criticism by a lot of people now that we should not have indulged in exports of vaccines. But that's not the way how the world works. You cannot be, because India doesn't believe in the military power, so it's a soft power for you. You are there to help countries. So India did take, and that's why it has become a fulcrum, even in the Quad, when we are talking of manufacturing vaccines in India by the Americans with the support from the Japanese and the Australians. So that is the model that is going to succeed as far as the fight against the COVID is concerned. But we have faced the problem. There are resilient supply value chains have been disrupted totally because of China's intransigence, I would say. And so it's not easy when we depend a great deal for our APIs on China. So then only we can become the pharmacy of the hub. For supply of, for producing a vaccine, you are dependent on 15, 16 countries, including the US. And if the raw materials are not supplied by them, it'll be very difficult for you to do that. So that's why I'm saying that it is important that there is some kind of a minimum collaboration. And I also feel that during this time, this period, India has achieved a potential of coming up with its own robust and resilient global value supply chain in the healthcare sector, which is extremely important, as I mentioned in the beginning in my 4 H's. So I think there's a good opportunity for India, but we'll have to tie up with the countries that are not erratic in the supplies of the raw materials, because no single country can either produce it or can use it or support. So it requires a full chain in that sense. And so it's very important that we follow that, and we must expand this kind of a collaboration so that you can at least look after the new challenges which are going to come up once again.
Right, sir. When you talked about India and US relations, last year when USA needed FCQs, there was some export ban in India, but we lifted when USA needed it. And even when the USA was suffering, it reciprocated by sending us ventilators in the batches of 50 each in 200 in numbers. But when this year we needed support, they denied, saying that we need to vaccinate American people first. Of course, every administration is responsible to their own people. But there was, if in case they would not have provided us vaccine, but they could have provided us raw materials so that we can produce it in our own country. So when we see, even not in the case of COVID-19, even in the various different cases, be it maritime issues or be it any regional geopolitical issue, we have seen that Indo-US relations is largely called as a marriage of convenience. And so what's your take on USA's vaccination policy and keeping India on hold as far as vaccines or raw materials for producing vaccines are concerned? And how you see the dynamics of Indo-US relations post-COVID-19? I mean, there has been certain kind of anger built up in India as well, considering the USA's vaccine policy. So where do you think that the Indo-US relations will move ahead, considering the geopolitical situation?
Well, this is we knew it for last 5-6 years at least, or I'm quite sure in India, foreign policy establishment understands that the most important thing in foreign policy is your own national interest. You are always serving your national interest, right? That is for every country to do so. I have nothing against America trying to serve its own people. I mean, naturally you need, because see, that's very important for them. That's what the government is there for, to do it, right? But what I'm not in favor of is the hoarding that you are doing at a time when you do not even need that. That is something that is absolutely essential. And if every country started stopping the raw materials that are required, then how would you trade? How would you grow? How the value supply chains that we are talking about so much is going to function? So no doubt that the Americans have done what they had to do. Every government's responsibility is towards its own people. That is number one. There is no dispute with that. The dispute is essentially that the approach that you take and how insensitive could you become to the remainder of the population of the world. Now today, as I said, about 0.3, 0.4% people in Africa and other poorer countries have only been vaccinated, right? Compared to 45, 50%, 60% in the advanced countries. And on top of it, they're sitting on this. They have committed some funds now there are international organizations like the COVAX facility, like the Gavi, under the UNICEF and others, which are international organizations in which America and everybody else is a part of it, and they're contributing to it. India has been contributing it, and that's where it goes to. Only yesterday they committed some $2 billion. So money is coming in. The problem, so that's why I would not say that India's relationship with US, because see, they are very close to Canada. It's a next door neighbor. Mexico is the next door neighbor. They did not supply to them either, right? So it has been kind of an equanimous policy. China, on the other hand, has been supplying to many countries. Russia has been supplying to many countries, depending on their own production limits, right? But firstly, they were not being accepted in certain countries because of geopolitics. As I said, that India's Covaxin is only approved by 8 or 9 countries. And on the other hand, the WHO has still not approved it, right? It's a very efficient vaccine, despite that. Because that's something called politics. Under whatever garb you can delay. Yesterday, they approved China's Sinovac, the second vaccine also from China. Now, this is something that is happening. So I would not call the Indo-US relationship as a marriage of convenience alone. It is, in fact, has a merit and some meat in it. Because today the only country, it is not only the hyperpower, it is also the so-called greatest democracy in the world, right? So we have the value systems that are working together. We understand one another in that sense. Then we also feel that, the relationship is across the spectrum, right? In many ways. Like today, for example, initially, USA was having a big problem, and then they started allowing all kinds of everything once they came under a lot of pressure, domestically and from internationally, on the kind of stance they took. When in India we had the second wave, Recently, our foreign minister was there also, and he talked to them, and we might be getting some more vaccines from there. So then they know it, because from their strategic perspective today, the US's total foreign policy today is veering towards Indo-Pacific. You have to look at it this way. Now, the Indo-Pacific means, from their point of view, containment of China, right? Now, there are 4 countries in the Quad that have become part of this grouping, which is an informal grouping, but of course, at the level of heads of state and government, they met for the first time in the Quad. So that is the China-centric policy that they are adopting. Now, India, without India, this Quad will not succeed. India is the only country that has the heft to partner with them. So it is, I would not say marriage of convenience, and that's the reason they call it Global Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The kind of agreements that we have signed with regard to, be it for defense, or security, cyber security, or space, or nuclear, whatever, in every single strategic area, we have worked together. Secondly, as far as the climate change is concerned, that is an agenda of President Biden. He's very much gung-ho about that. He's come back onto the treaty. India is a leader in that. We have started the Indian International Solar Alliance. We have got our resilience infrastructure initiative and some things which have not been done before. So we have those 2 initiatives which they understand the value of it, because see, India has already completed most of its mandatory requirements it has fulfilled. So US understands. Thirdly, India is one of the biggest markets, right, for defense and for other things. It's the second biggest market in the world. So US is an economic or mercantile nation, right? So they're looking for these opportunities. So for them, it is extremely important from this. From India, we need technology, we need investments, and therefore it is extremely important for us. So each country is trying to serve in every relationship its own interest in the first place, right? So when we look at the thing, what can I get out of it also is an approach that one takes. If you are not central enough or crucial or critical enough to as another country's equations, then you might just have a simple handshake, and that's the kind of relationship that you may have. But India is not the country, so strategically located, and especially in the context of a rising China, India is extremely important for this. Now, as I mentioned already about raw materials and all, now they're coming. Americans have agreed to this. And not only that, now under the Quad for the first time when the leaders met, and then they also wrote an op-ed in Washington Post, in which all the 4 leaders actually came up with 3 things which are very important. Number 1 was vaccine partnership, which I mentioned already, the India will be manufacturing with the assistance from other countries, 1 billion doses, which can be much more. And number 2 was rare earths. You know, they are very important for your future generation. So rare earths collaboration, how are we going to control and value supply? That's an important thing for any growing economy. And India is the 3rd largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, if you were to look at it as it is. So India, Japan, and US, if you come to think of it in top 5, you have 3 economies in this Quad already there. And Japan is technologically also very superior. So it is a collaboration which is happening. But I think that we are not only worried about this US aspect in this, we are also have collaborations in trilateral formats with Japan, with Australia, with other countries. So all that is moving forward in that domain. And I think that after the COVID-19, number 1, as I said, the COVID is still very much there. There is a lot of place to work together. So I think that post COVID-19, we will not have any major problem, or I do not foresee any hiccups in going on the relationship, because US's strategic confrontation with China is unlikely to change.
Absolutely, sir. And considering the post-COVID situation, we can say that India has a significant role to play in the region. And if we talk about India's handling of the case of the COVID situation, we see that in January there was a misconception, or maybe a wrong message was sent by India to the world that we have already dealt with the COVID-19 crisis, and ultimately without we were not prepared, and India got engulfed into the second wave of COVID-19 crisis. So, sir, what do you think that, and if, even that when we needed our people to get vaccinated, we also exported vaccines to different regional countries, Indian Ocean region countries. So, what do you think that how we can vaccinate our own people in due time, because it's such a large population we have, and we have the global responsibility also, because we believe in a rule-based order. So what do you think that what would be the India's position, and how India would be able to tackle the situation?
You see, the thing is that I cannot condone that if we had any management issues in fighting the pandemic or understanding that what will be its intensity. There is absolutely no doubt about it that there have been lapses on our part, right? But I also am fully supportive of the thing that what India did as its vaccine mastery, or its Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, or whatever the philosophy. That's India. That is not the countries who are looking at. And frankly, I mean, if you were to see, they supplied some 65 million vaccines to 95 countries. Now, these vaccines also have a lifespan, right? In the beginning, a lot of people were just doubting the vaccines. They just thought, even today, there are many people who don't want to take the vaccine, and vaccine will expire. You will waste the vaccine. And there are, on the other hand, there are countries which are dying and they want vaccines, right? What India did was just sent it whatever was surplus there. But I think that what our own value supply chains, because probably we could not estimate the extent of this pandemic within India on the second wave, that we were not preparing our own supply lines properly with oxygen, hospital bed, this and that. Now that is our internal management issue. On the policy front, I think India has achieved a tremendous effort, which is clearly evident from the fact that when we are seeing a lot of countries who came to assist India during this period, right? We've seen nearly every country in the world has, those who could, 40, 50 countries have been providing India with assistance all through to gear up immediately. We have internal heft, which we'll acquire eventually. You know, we didn't produce any PPE kit before the pandemic, and then within a very short time, India became a major exporter of it, right? So we have our own thing. And secondly, whatever it is, you may agree, disagree, whatever, but I think that out of this pandemic has come something called Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? I think that is a very important initiative, and provided it moves in a right direction, you know, that is very important. Most important thing is how it moves, how it is carried forward, what is the plan of action. But in a sense, because it does not look at India being confined to India alone, or trying to protect its boundaries, its belt, its anything, or being intrusive. It is not. What India is trying to do is basically, and India is trying to develop the expertise and competence in order to compete as far as the value and supply chains and the global value supply chains are concerned. And in that, I think there are different models. We can perhaps go through ASEAN, we can go through South, we can go through other regional, and plug in wherever we can with our own expertise. So from our perspective, it is extremely important. And we have several other challenges. For example, we have a big challenge with China, which will continue to remain like that. We have the problem with Pakistan, essentially of terrorism, which is unlikely to be resolved in a near future, despite the fact that we have some kind of a truce at the moment. So we also will have to confront the binaries between various organizations in which part of it. For example, we are part of Quad, where US, Japan, and Australia are our partners, and we are part of the BRICS, where Brazil, Russia, China, India. So how do we blend the two? That is the kind of problem that will continue to face you. So India has followed this policy of, it calls multiple alignments. You see, the problem between India and US is that US only knows how to operate in an alliance system, right? They believe in alliances, that you have to be my ally. Ally means 100% ally, right? India, on the other hand, has an aversion for alliance system. We do not like to be tagged by ABCD, something like that. So we are more comfortable in a multilateral setting. And that is the way India's psyche is, that's the way our cultural Networking, that's the way our upbringing is, because India is so diverse. So we have this diversity of thought and things. Everybody goes his way, talks about it, this and that. So exactly the same way the foreign policy also is conducted. It cannot be dictated by US or by Russia or by China or any countries exactly what we do, how we'll do it. Maybe we'll do it the way they want it, but the way we'll do it when we know that it is worth doing it. That's the difference.
Right, sir. I think you have covered all the questions, and I wanted to ask you more questions, but I think in your explanation and while giving your perspective, you have already covered the questions. So I would like to extend my heartfelt thank you to you, sir, for joining us today. And it was a very fruitful session as you have covered all the dynamics, I mean, most of the dynamics of global politics and how COVID-19 is going to reshape it. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And now, yes, sir.
Thank you,
Now
sir.
I would like to call Sanidhya to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for joining today. It's a
Thank you, Sanidhya.
great pleasure to have you, sir. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.